Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Catherine Forsey. I'm the Learning Rooms and STEM consultant for Gratnells. I'm here today in my capacity as a Gratnells STEM ambassador for today's Does Your Classroom Help Children Learn webinar. For those of you who are on Twitter, these are the handles that you'll need if you'd like to connect with the project or share your thoughts from the session. May I also invite you to use the typed chat function at any time. There will be a dedicated question and answer session after the webinar, and we're going to look through the chat to pick up any questions, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. This presentation section of the webinar is being recorded for the benefit of colleagues who are unable to join us live today. We've had a lot of people register, I think, on the premise that they know that they're going to get sent the recording. So we weren't quite sure how many people were going to join live. But the recording is going to be shared publicly with the people who've registered. The question and answer session and the open discussion that follows the presentation is not going to be shared. So if you come on screen then and ask questions or speak, that recording won't be shared. It'll just be the people who are here that can see you. So this is what I'm going to cover today. The classroom environment affects student performance, and through this webinar we're going to explore some of the research underpinning this work. We're going to look at some key environmental factors influencing learning in your classroom. You're going to find out how to monitor and control the 7 key environmental factors, make simple changes that will improve student performance and outcomes. And we're going to look at how to introduce classroom-based inquiries to your students, which will hopefully facilitate greater awareness and improve student agency in regards to their learning environment. Everyone who's registered to be here will be sent a link to receive this session recording, and you'll be able to access further information on this topic via our dedicated Learnometer website. We're going to share a link to that website in the chat now. So this is how I've broken down this session today. It's just a short one. It's going to be 30-35 minutes of me presenting, and then we're going into question, answer and discussion. So whilst I am talking today mostly about classrooms, the research and the monitoring that I'm talking about is just as relevant to any work environment. So be that your classroom, a laboratory, a university or office space. So wherever you are, this will be relevant to the space in which you work or teach. So firstly, introductions. I've been working with Gratnells for about 6 years now as their Learning Rooms and STEM consultant. I lead workshops at national education conferences and create our popular practical science and STEM What's in My Tray resources. I'm a biologist by training and a chartered science teacher. And for the last 13 years, I've worked independently with schools across the UK, providing training, development, inset on practical science, STEM, outdoor learning and curriculum development. It's also good for me to tell you a little bit about Professor Stephen Heppel. It's Professor Heppel's research and invention that I'm going to be talking about and sharing with you today. Professor Heppel is a world-leading expert in the science of improving educational outcomes. He works with several universities and research teams across the UK and overseas. And Professor Heppel is the inventor of a small device called the Learnometer. And through his partnership with Gratnells, we've been working together to bring real-time classroom environment monitoring devices into schools and universities all over the world to help improve student outcomes. So this is a really research-heavy area. I think of it as the science behind creating an optimal environment for learning. I don't want to overwhelm you all with hundreds of references. I'm going to focus on key classroom factors, real life conditions and the impact on pupils. We're going to focus on actionable steps that we can all take to improve our learning spaces straight away. However, if you do love digging into the literature as much as I do, I've packed the final slide of the presentation, which is hidden right at the end, with key references that I've used to create this webinar. Many of these references link into further references, so there's a really deep rabbit hole open to anybody who likes to dive into the research. There is, however, one key study that heavily informs this area of work, and I'd like to share it with you now. In 2005, 2015, Professor Peter Barrett and his team at Salford University published the Clever Classrooms report. The report shared the findings of a year-long study involving 3 local authorities, 27 primary schools, and tracked the progress of 3,766 pupils. They studied the impact of light, temperature, air quality, colour, complexity, flexibility and ownership on academic performance. They looked at this in reading, writing and maths in 153 classroom spaces, so it's quite a wide-ranging study. They found that differences in the physical characteristics of classroom explain 16% of the variation in learning progress over a year for the pupils included in the study. Or to make this more tangible, they estimated that the impact of moving an average child from the least effective to the most effective space would be around 1.3 sublevels. Now that's a big impact when pupils were typically making 2 sublevels of progress every year. There are other studies that put these educational gains closer to 25%, which is even more significant than the 16% reported here. If we take that 16% progress and as our total, and we break that down, you can see that light, temperature and air quality account for around half of the total impact in learning gains. That's the dark orange section here on this pie chart. This half is the area that we're going to be looking at more closely in the webinar. And while the Barrett study showed that optimising the physical conditions in our classrooms has a significant impact on pupil progress, and it presented steps that building designers and teachers could take to improve their environments, they did not suggest optimum levels for any of the measurable classroom factors. So without really digging into the research, it's difficult for frontline practitioners to get to grips with exactly what good looks like and how to apply it in their own classrooms. Another significant finding of the Barrett study was that while some of these factors might seem mundane or everyday, they're not so obvious that they are being consistently acted upon and optimised in schools. So there are lots of benefits to be reaped. We just need some more practical support and guidance to reap them. So what we're looking at here is how we take that research and apply it in our own learning spaces. I mentioned that 50% of the progress seen in the Barrett study could be attributed to just 3 main factors: air quality, temperature and light. Professor Heppel and his team have identified a link between these classroom conditions and student performance, and I'm going to play a short video now where Professor Heppel introduces this work himself.
Hello, I'm Stephen Heppel. I've been a professor for 30 years this year, and for the last several years we've been researching the learning spaces environment in the hope of making learning a lot better. We've been looking at the tiny details that singly just sound like common sense: better light, better temperature, better ventilation, less CO2, but together an aggregation of marginal gains that we've learned from sport transforms learning. And with children all over the country, all over the world, working so hard to be the best they can possibly be, we're trying to give them the environment that allows them to be personal bests every single day of their learning lives.
So Professor Heppel's work is linked to a live in-school data collection project through a classroom-based device called the Learnometer, which is photographed here. This is the device that Professor Heppel has invented. And as part of the pilot project, Learnometer devices were placed in 100 case study schools and also within universities all across the world. These devices are all feeding back live data to the cloud. That data is then analysed by the research team, who are able to gain further insights into the links between classroom conditions and student performance. Each school is able to access their own data via a personalised dashboard and see in real time what the learning conditions are like in their own classrooms. The dashboard also makes recommendations as to how conditions can be improved. I'm going to let Professor Heppel explain how pupils at one of our case study schools are getting involved with the research too.
In the classroom, there are so many details that matter. The quality of the light, pollution level, and temperature we know matters, as does the CO2 in the room. All these variables impact on three things: their behaviour, their ability to be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, pretty sharp coming up to lunchtime. Secondly, their academic performance, their brains work better. But thirdly, they're part of the research about how can we make our classroom better still. And that metacognition, that learning about learning, is a very important part of all this as well. So they behave better, the results are better, and they add something to the party. What's not to like?
So at these case study sites, what we're seeing is an increased awareness around the impact of classroom environments on learning outcomes. Teachers and pupils are taking ownership of their environment to make improvements. You heard Professor Heppel mention the aggregation of marginal gains. So the research tells us it's not just one factor that's key to improving pupil outcomes, but multiple factors. And when we work to optimise all of those, that's when we see the biggest impact on learning. And because we're all currently working in a very COVID-dominated environment, I'm also going to highlight where the classroom monitoring that we're recommending can help to reduce viral transmission. So I've mentioned light, temperature and air quality account for around half of the impact on pupil progress seen in the Barrett study. We also know there are several elements that contribute to overall air quality. Professor Heppel and the Learnometer project have separated out the air quality elements and are focusing their work on 7 key factors. These are carbon dioxide, chemicals, fine dust, and those 3 are the air quality components, temperature, humidity, ambient light, and ambient noise. So now we know all of those, I've got a really quick survey for everyone, because what I'd like to do is find out which of those environmental factors we are all currently monitoring in our classrooms or learning spaces. We're just trying to get an idea of our baseline. It's a completely anonymous. All the answers are going to be collated before they're shared. And I have said learning spaces here because I know some people joining us are not classroom teachers. So please just think of the learning space or work environment where you regularly spend your time and answer for that space. I've got a poll that I'm going to launch and I invite you all to complete. Oh, hang on. Wrong poll. Let me move it to the first one. There we go. So if you could all have a go at completing that and just answer which of the 7 key factors do you currently regularly monitor and how do you monitor them? There is an option for none of them and we don't, because I expected that some people might be at that point. So great, I can see some answers coming in here already. Once you've submitted your answers, hit the submit button and then I can see them all. So I can see so far that people are regularly monitoring temperature and humidity, or they don't monitor any of them, and that unsurprisingly people are using a thermometer to do that. That's kind of what I expected. Most people working within a classroom or a workspace usually have a thermometer on the wall so they can see what their temperature is. If everyone's had a chance to pop some answers in there, just click submit if you're still clicking, then I will end the polling and share the results with you all. No, there you go, so you can see what I see. So people are monitoring temperature and humidity or nothing at all. So what we're going to do is I'm going to move on and I'm going to tell you something about each of these factors, and we will see how you feel at the end about whether or not you might want to start monitoring some of those things and learn about the impact that that could have in your classroom. So we know what those 7 key factors are. We know that we're not monitoring all of them at the moment, and some of us are only monitoring 1 or 2. But each of them, I'm going to go through each of the factors in turn. Now, each of them could actually be thought of as a separate scientific inquiry in the classroom, but I'm going to come back to the scientific inquiry part later. The first one I'm going to talk to you about is carbon dioxide. I'm starting here because carbon dioxide is the key indicator of indoor air quality and effective ventilation. Levels above 1,000 parts per million can increase sleepiness, reduce concentration, increase heart rate, and induce feelings of nausea. And the severity of these symptoms increases as levels increase, and this varies from person to person. Guideline levels for each of the factors that I'm talking about today are always shown here, just at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. So carbon dioxide, we'll probably all know that comes from people breathing. The more people there are and the more active they are, that means more CO2. Exam halls are particularly problematic, and they often see high levels of CO2 well above those guidelines amount, and that can diminish exam performance. And that's just because there's so many people in that space. When we're thinking about solutions here, carbon dioxide is heavier than air. So children sat on the carpet are more susceptible than adults who are stood up. Opening high windows on a still day is going to have less of an impact than opening a door, and windows that can open at the bottom or low ventilation panels or extractors are going to be more effective because that's where the CO2 pools. But if you can combine opening windows and doors with air circulation systems like fans, that's going to have the biggest impact. And actually, even if ventilation is only performed at break times, the data shows us that this significantly reduces carbon dioxide levels and helps to prevent that stagnation and further accumulation throughout the day. If you don't ventilate, you just get a steady increase throughout the whole school day. Both of the case study schools that I've linked to here introduce plants to their classrooms as one of the options to help balance their learning environment. Fingering Ho launched a Bring Your Own Plant scheme, and the Dubai school installed a plant wall. I shared a photograph of that plant wall on an earlier slide. Professor Heppel's article on the topic and some of NASA's research around plants can be found by following those 2 links, and these slides will be included in the information you're sent after the webinar. In the current COVID-dominated environment, monitoring CO2 levels is an effective way of monitoring the efficiency of your classroom ventilation. This graph here shows real classroom learnometer data that was gained on the first day of term in September 2020. We can see a rapid buildup of CO2 here in all but one classroom, which is the purple line. This was the only classroom with open windows and effective air circulation. The classroom with no ventilation sees CO2 levels exceeding 1,000 parts per million by mid-morning, and these 2 in the middle have partial ventilation. We know that ventilation is key to reducing viral transmission, and if schools had access to this type of data, they'd be able to act rapidly to make sure all of their classrooms were being effectively ventilated through the entire day, which is great for pupil and teacher health. So we're moving on from CO2 into volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. They're a really diverse group of chemicals, but exposure to VOCs is often just known as air pollution. This can cause headaches, dizziness, tiredness, nasal congestion, coughing, wheezing, sore throat. It also triggers allergies, asthma, skin irritation, and eczema. Long-term exposure makes it more difficult to concentrate, learn new things, and remember. And airborne pollution significantly damages learners' academic progress, which is not surprising when you see all those impacts of it. The levels of VOCs should be as low as possible. There's no safe low level of these. We just need to get them as low as we can. There are a wide range of sources, including simple things you'll find in your classroom: stationery and craft items, hard plastic used in toys, photocopiers, printers, perfumes, deodorants, paints, finishes, varnishes, solvent, any new furniture or flooring, cleaning products, air fresheners, cooking and grilling, frying, and vehicle exhausts. In short, it's anything that you can smell that comes from VOCs, and some of those are more damaging than others. So how do we reduce these in our learning spaces? The concentration of lots of VOCs is higher indoors than outdoors. So we're back to ventilation again, it's really important. Air filtration equipment significantly improves student performance, and it's been shown to have a cost-benefit advantage over more traditional approaches to improving student outcomes. So the interventions you'll commonly see in the classrooms, the ventilation systems are actually more effective than that. Schools can work with parents and governors to plan routes to and from schools that avoid the most polluted routes. So that's pollution on the way to and from school. And then picking the paints, varnishes, personal hygiene products, cleaning and craft products that you use to make sure that they're low VOC, unscented products. Also making sure that kitchens and copier rooms are ventilated to the outdoors and any internal doors to those rooms are kept closed. Making sure that you ventilate well after refurbishments, and then particularly important at the moment, after deep cleans. And remembering VOCs can be emitted for several days, so sometimes it takes time for things to settle. The case study schools here showed us during COVID, we've seen huge spikes in VOC concentration due to COVID deep cleaning. The Learnometer can pick up 50 different VOCs. So monitoring of these allows us to develop less harmful cleaning regimes, and it might help us think about moving major cleaning to the ends of days, which allows time before the rooms are occupied to ventilate well, and also choosing products really carefully to avoid VOCs. And you can chat with your cleaners to help raise awareness. The next thing I'm going to talk about is fine dust. It's known as PM2.5. It's a particulate matter with a diameter less than 2.5 micrometers, which is more than 100 times thinner than a human hair, so it's tiny. It's often also grouped with VOC and referred to broadly as air pollution. These microparticulates can travel into children's lungs, exacerbate asthma, and they impact levels of attendance, and they've been associated with cognitive impairment. None of these things that we want to find in our schools. So levels should be as low as possible. And because again, there's no safe threshold below which no adverse effects would be anticipated. And we also know that children are more susceptible to the effects of fine dust than adults are. So where does this fine dust come from? So there's a list of internal and external sources here, and that can be from building materials, classroom chalk, clothing and shoes, and then external ones with local industry, bakeries, for example, but also soil dust, road dust, and coastal schools might see it in the form of marine aerosols like sea salt. So the solutions to this, you have to know your indoor and outdoor PM2.5 levels before you can consider solutions. Ventilation and letting in outdoor air could be great, but if the outdoor levels of PM2.5 happen to be very high, then it's going to make the problem worse. So it's useful to check levels in different places. Again, here, air filtration equipment will reduce indoor levels of PM2.5, and planning your school routes again, moving your car drop-off and pick-up bays further away from the school, and promoting policies for turning off the car engines while people are waiting. As well as negative effects on student performance and exams, which has a lifelong impact on individuals, air pollution in the UK causes 40,000 premature deaths every year, which is about 8.3% of deaths. And the adverse impact on public health and pollution is estimated to cost the UK economy about £20 billion a year. So increasing awareness of this problem will increase support for tackling polluters. And I think as we all move towards COP26 in November, we're going to see more of a focus on these types of topics. So temperature, a simpler one, and one that more of you are monitoring. Temperature and humidity increase, students report greater discomfort, and their achievement and task performance deteriorates, and their attention span goes down. There is an optimal temperature range here for learning, and outside this range, we know that pupil performance suffers. So the sources of temperature are pretty obvious. I'm not going to run over those, but in terms of solutions, they can either be at the building level with external shades for south-facing windows, or internal blinds coupled with ventilation can help reduce the problem. You can also put shrubs or planters outside south-facing windows, and they provide some shading and help to reduce the sun heat gain. And then, of course, inside the classroom, if you've got thermostat controls, radiator controls, along with ventilation and air conditioning, if you've got it, can all help to get the temperature into the optimal range. Our case study schools tell us that most classrooms are either too hot or, less damagingly, too cold for learning. Cooler is better in terms of pupils' learning efficiency. And then in terms of COVID-19, there is an association between infection rate and air temperature. The highest risk is reported to occur around 9 degrees C. So in short, too cold increases the risk of COVID infection, but too warm sees performance decline linearly. So finding a sweet spot might be a challenge, but at least if we're continuously monitoring, we can see where our peaks and troughs are through the day, and then we can take action when we need to. Linked to temperature is humidity, and it similarly impacts achievement, task performance, and attention span. Humidity is important for respiratory health, and it can contribute to other health risks such as the growth of toxic mold spores and fungus. On the flip side, dehydration also reduces cognitive performance. So once again, there's an ideal range that we're looking for here. Humidity comes out in the breath that we breathe. And also we can introduce it to our classrooms on outdoor shoes and clothing if they all come in wet. We also see it in terms of condensation. Rugs in classrooms will trap damp, and you can also have damp from leaks in buildings, structures and pipes. And then lack of ventilation also increases your humidity. So some of the solutions here, again, we're back to ventilation and air circulation, but removing rugs and removing outdoor shoes. Some classrooms might find that they're too dry. So in those senses, a bowl of water on the windowsill or damp towels on radiators can increase the humidity, as well as bought-in humidifier or dehumidifier machines. A low-tech solution, charcoal briquettes or silica-based cat litter are another approach to reducing the humidity if you want to bring it down. But plants are also really important because they can help to balance humidity. In a normal year, we'd be looking at 30 to 50% relative humidity to be optimal, both in terms of respiratory health and cognitive performance. But research looking into COVID and what the humidity levels should be to help reduce viral transmission suggests that we should try and keep humidity above 40%, because when our nose, airways, cells and mucous membranes become too dry, we're more at risk of contracting the virus. So what we're looking for is between 40 and 50% as the sweet spot. So you can try experimenting with some of the solutions shared here to see if you can get as close as you can to within that range. Looking at light levels now, quite simply, children don't learn as well when the light levels are low, and their behaviour suffers too. So if light levels are uneven across a classroom, then you can have equity issues for the group. Optimal levels are shown here, between 500, but a target of 1,000 lux. It tends to be the higher the better, as long as it's comfortable. Sources, again, we've got your direct and indirect light sources here, remembering that dark walls and ceilings can be a sink for light. And our solutions, you can remove obstructions from glass. Many of the schools that we've worked with introduce a clear glass policy throughout the school to increase light as much as possible. We can paint our walls and ceilings in high refraction index paint to bounce the light around, and modify our displays and fixtures to avoid use of dark colours. If we're picking bulbs, we're looking for bright white LED bulbs with Kelvin values of between 5,000 and 6,500. These are known as natural or daylight LEDs. What we've found in the case study schools, that children have identified themselves the darker areas of their classrooms, and they've made changes. And engaging the pupils in this way is really powerful. Those schools have also had local authority decorators come in and apply bright white paint, and students have chosen white pots for their plants that they brought in to again help bounce the light around. And obstructions have been removed from the windows and internal doors wherever they can. In 2009, Tanner carried out a research survey of 71 elementary schools in the United States, and looked at the impact of natural light and sources of artificial light in classrooms. And these results provide more evidence that good quality lighting significantly influences reading vocabulary and science test scores. So it's important to get light right. The last one I think we're looking at here is noise. Noisy rooms obstruct children's ability to concentrate and perform. And that comes, of course, from their voices, but also furniture, movement of people, mechanical sounds like fans and air conditioners, background music or noise from other classrooms, and external noise such as traffic all play a part. Reducing ambient noise, there's several ways we can do this. We can install sound absorbing panels or hang mineral wool filled white umbrellas from the ceilings. Again, this helps with the light. We can add soft pads to the table and chair legs and think about quieter flooring choices when they come to be replaced. Giving students the ability to monitor though and own the issue themselves is really important. If you have background music, then keep it below 80 beats per minute and also avoid songs with familiar lyrics. We also have found success in introducing plant walls because they can absorb sound. Research from Picard and Bradley, amongst others, confirms that the classroom sound signature affects how well students achieve. And worldwide, there are these 100 case study schools and universities involved in the learnometer research. And some of the biggest impacts we've seen in this area are when the children monitor and record their own classroom conditions, and they can experiment with ways to reduce noise levels. So student agency is key. So I've covered really quickly all the 7 factors in some detail, but what I've created here is a condensed summary of the guideline levels and the remedies. Don't worry if you can't pick it all out on the screen right now. A PDF version of this presentation is going to be shared. So if you'd like to, you can print out this slide and display it in your learning spaces so you know what you're looking for and the remedies to adjust it. Looking now at the student-led scientific inquiries and investigations that are possible, Professor Heppel believes that schools who actively engage children with the classroom environment monitoring see greater gains in terms of metacognition and student agency. But the first question here is, how do we monitor these 7 factors? So we've got some options. We could do this via mobile phone apps, traditional data loggers with multiple sensors, or of course the Learnometer device, which I've been talking to you about, which continuously and synchronously measures all 7 of those key factors and provides a live digital display. And it comes with access to a live dashboard that you can get to via your desktop computer or laptop. The data is also shared with the cloud and combined with data from other schools, and it keeps informing Professor Heppel's research. So you're part of a much bigger research project. And as you can see, it's quite small, so it's really discreet in the classroom. So for those scientific inquiries, investigations, once you've decided how to monitor your learning environment, what I suggest is splitting your class into 7 groups. Each group owns one of the key factors and they carry out their research into that factor, what it is, the sources, and come up with potential solutions. They monitor the levels, they test out the solutions, and they see in real time the impact of the changes that they've made. And they'll be able to see the data via your personal live dashboard. And they can also record observations, the sort of softer recording around how they were feeling and how they were learning that day. They can evaluate their own findings and present them to the rest of the class or even share it with the whole school. This process facilitates ownership and awareness and follows all of the principles of working scientifically. And to extend their investigations further, they could repeat this with different classrooms and different year groups. For example, year 6 could compare their data to the data from a reception classroom, and they can look for similarities and differences. So the curriculum links are numerous. I've captured them here just to try and provide a complete picture. Plants have the potential to significantly impact several of the key factors, and there are lots of wider learning opportunities when introducing plants to your classrooms. As well as exploring differences across the school, we can also look at how habitats differ by taking the device outside into school grounds, perhaps even on a field trip. Does a woodland habitat have different conditions to a human habitat? And then a key question I'd like you all to consider is, does the outdoors provide a more optimal learning environment for your students than the indoors? The device is also a great way to drill down into human impacts on the environment, both indoor and our wider contributions in terms of outdoor pollution. So we're thinking deforestation, urbanisation, and so on, also linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. So it gives us that global bigger picture. I've packed quite a lot in there, and we're now coming to the end of the presentation element of the webinar. But just before we start the Q&A, I'm going to ask if I can check in with you all to ask you a couple more questions, and I'm going to launch 2 quick polls again. The first one, let me just get to that one. Okay, the first one is the same options as the first survey, but asks which of the 7 key factors will you regularly monitor in your classroom and learning spaces in the future, and how do you think you're going to monitor them? So if I can ask you to fill in those, and we'll see if we get any answers come through. Here we go, see your answers there. Just give a few more seconds for anybody else to submit their answers. I'm not sure if everyone can access the polls via their mobiles and the ways in which they're joining. I'm going to end that now, and I'll share the results with you. And it looks like people are moving towards carbon dioxide, chemicals, fine dust and temperature, and they're going to hopefully use a learnometer to do that, which is going to be really interesting. I think if you guys do that, we would really love to know what your data comes back like and find out how you're doing in your school. And then the last poll that I'm going to share with you here is based on what you have heard today, what actions will you take or continue to take in your classroom to improve the learning environment? There are 2 parts to this poll, and there are quite a few options. So if there's anything that you plan to do that's not captured in the survey, please just type that into the chat. So I'm going to give you a few seconds here just to click what actions you might take. This could be without doing any monitoring or recording, but there are just things that you could do within your classroom. So click away and then press submit. There are 2 questions because there are so many options. I'm not sure if that one's working. Can you nod for me, Bhavini, if you can see it? Okay. It's quite a lot of options, so I'm just going to let people roll through and click. Oh, there we go. We've got some coming in now. So just while I let those come in, I'll say what people are clicking on: improving natural ventilation by opening doors and windows, introducing plants, humidify or dehumidify, and they're going to check and change light bulbs. So we can see here that there are really quite simple steps that you can take to make a difference in your classroom straight away. I'm going to end that polling now and close that window, and then just got that last bit. So it's just to say thank you to everybody who's joined the presentation live today and for joining in with the surveys. Look out for an email from Learning Rooms next week with a link to this recording and the slides from today, which will contain all the links that I've mentioned and that handy slide of references I said for those who'd like to dig into the research. We are planning a series of future webinars on different topics and practical activities, and I do hope you'll join us again for those. For those who are not staying for the Q&A, thank you very much for coming along, and please get in touch via the details you can see on the screen should you need any further support or information.